David Johnson had been working at Vanguard Motors for 5 years, long enough to become part of the fabric of the company, though no one really saw him anymore. His days were filled with the hum of machinery, the sound of conversations he wasn't part of, and the clattering of tools in the background. He wasn't a mechanic, an engineer, or even a team leader. He was just the janitor, invisible to the team of brilliant minds that walked through the factory halls like they were gods. At 35, David had once been one of them. He'd walked these same halls with excitement, his eyes burning with passion and ambition. An engineer, young, brilliant, and full of promise. His designs had pushed the boundaries of automotive engineering, particularly the revolutionary new engine prototype he'd been developing for Vanguard. But that was before they destroyed everything he had worked for. His innovation had been stolen from him, taken by the company that he had once trusted. Instead of a leading role in their R&D department, David had found himself framed for a crime he didn't commit. Accused of espionage and industrial theft, his reputation was obliterated, his career ruined. And to add insult to injury, he was left with nothing but the remnants of his own ambition, a janitorial position in the company that had betrayed him. For 5 years, David had pushed the mop through the halls of Vanguard Motors, quietly observing from the sidelines, watching engineers and mechanics work on projects that should have been his. He was the ghost in the background, always there, but never acknowledged. He moved like a shadow through the factory, cleaning up the messes that others created, all the while biding his time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when that opportunity finally presented itself. The sound of raised voices echoed from Bay 3, where the newest prototype, a sleek and expensive black luxury sedan, sat with its hood popped open. A group of engineers stood around the vehicle, their faces tight with frustration. The car had been in development for months, but there was a serious issue. No one could get the custom-built V12 engine to run. Diagnostics had been checked and rechecked, yet nothing seemed to work. Maybe the fuel injection system's clogged, suggested one of the younger mechanics, his voice laced with doubt. "I've already checked it," Steve Mitchell, the senior mechanic, replied, wiping grease from his forehead. "It's pristine. The problem's somewhere deeper." David continued sweeping nearby, his eyes narrowing as he listened intently. The V12 engine in question was unlike anything he'd seen before. A high-performance prototype that cost more than most people's homes. It should have been running perfectly, but something was off. As he moved closer, he could hear the murmurs of the engineers. The problem was clear to him now. This engine wasn't a new problem. It was one of his own, the same design flaw he had identified years ago, back when his ideas had been stolen. He had built that very engine, or at least a version of it, and now it was sitting right in front of him, broken, just like his career. The doors at the front of the garage hissed open, and in walked Chase Reynolds, the CEO of Vanguard Motors. His expensive Italian leather shoes clicked against the concrete, cutting through the tension in the room. His face was a mask of impatience as he scanned the scene before him. "What's going on here?" Chase's voice was sharp, a whip crack that cut through the murmurs of the engineers. Steve stepped forward. "We've been working on it all morning, sir. The engine's more complex than we anticipated. We haven't figured out what's wrong yet." Chase's eyes flashed with irritation. "This isn't a college project, Steve. I need results. This is $1 million prototype, and it's not even running. I've got investors breathing down my neck, and you're standing around like it's a science experiment." David kept his distance, leaning against a wall, the mop in his hand almost forgotten as he watched the scene unfold. He was used to this. The pressure, the frustration, it was all too familiar. It was exactly the kind of moment that had destroyed his career all those years ago. Only now, he wasn't the one in the spotlight. Now, it was all about Vanguard's new shining toy, the engine that no one could fix. But David knew something they didn't. He knew how to fix it. And if he could fix it, there was something else he wanted. A chance. A chance to prove that they had never truly understood the engine he designed. And a chance to prove that he wasn't just some janitor. But he didn't want the money. The $10,000 that Chase was offering to anyone who could fix it wasn't what motivated him. David wanted something else, something far more valuable. He wanted access to the R&D lab. One day, just one day to prove what they had stolen from him. The tension in the garage hung heavy in the air, palpable and suffocating. Chase Reynolds, arms crossed, surveyed the engineers with an air of superiority, his eyes scanning them one by one as though they were children who'd failed a simple test. His icy blue gaze fell on David, still standing by the corner, his mop in hand. "Well, well," Chase said with a mock smile, walking toward David with deliberate steps. "Looks like the janitor thinks he's got an idea." David kept his eyes focused on the floor, the dust clinging to the edges of his mop as he slowly wiped at the tile. He could feel the other engineers' eyes boring into him, a mix of skepticism and quiet amusement in their stares. He had been invisible to them for years. Now, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't. And that was exactly what made this moment so powerful. David took a slow breath, then spoke, his voice calm and controlled. "I didn't say I had an idea. I just said I could fix it." Laughter rippled through the room. Tommy Parker, the youngest of the mechanics, snorted, glancing over at Chase with an incredulous expression. Did the janitor just say he could fix a $1 million engine? Tommy chuckled, looking for validation from the others. Chase's cold, calculated smile spread wider, and he took another step toward David, looming over him. "So, what is it, David? Are you telling me that you, someone who spends his days pushing a mop around, know more about this prototype than the engineers and mechanics who've been working on it for months?" David's eyes flicked briefly to Carmen Diaz, the only woman engineer in the room. She stood off to the side, arms crossed, clearly frustrated with the situation, but holding her tongue. Carmen had always been one of the few who actually respected his knowledge, though she had never voiced it. He couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking now. David met Chase's gaze without flinching. "I don't need your money, Mr. Reynolds. What I want is one day in your R&D lab." The room fell silent. No one had expected that. Not in a million years. Chase raised an eyebrow, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You want what?" He leaned in, as if trying to smell a trick. "What would a janitor want in my R&D lab? You're out of your depth, old man. This isn't some garage project you can tinker with in your spare time. This is cutting-edge technology. But if you're so confident, fine. You think you can fix this mess?" David didn't back down. "If I fix it, you give me access to the lab. Just for one day. I'll prove I know more than you think." Chase's face twisted in a mix of contempt and curiosity. He was looking for an opportunity to humiliate David, to put him in his place. "You know what? Sure. Why not? You think you're so smart, so capable? Then I'll make a deal. Fix it, and you can have a day in the lab. But fail, and you'll spend the next 6 months working overtime. No pay, no extra benefits, and no complaints." David felt the weight of the challenge pressing down on him, but the offer was too good to pass up. One day in that lab, surrounded by the best engineers in the world, he could prove what had been stolen from him all those years ago. He could finally show that the ideas he had developed were his invention, his designs, his future. He stood taller, pushing his shoulders back, and held out his hand. "Deal," David said, his voice steady. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Chase's cold, calculating grin spread across his face. Chase shook David's hand with an exaggerated air of amusement, then turned to the others. "Well, looks like we have ourselves a show. I'll give you 1 hour, David. 1 hour to prove you're not just a janitor with a fantasy. You better not disappoint." David's grip tightened as they shook hands. He could feel the weight of the challenge settling in his bones. But he had no time to waste on nerves. This was his chance to reclaim what was taken from him, to prove his worth, to take back everything they had stolen from him. He stepped away from Chase, his mind already running through the details of the engine. It had been years, but he knew that engine. He had built it, designed it, and in some twisted way, it had been the key to everything he had lost. David moved toward Bay 6, where the car had been transferred, the other mechanics still watching with wide eyes. He was used to their doubt, their mockery. It had followed him like a shadow ever since he'd been framed. But today, for the first time in years, that shadow didn't seem so large. As he stood in front of the engine, staring down at the carefully constructed machine, he couldn't help but remember the day when he'd been the one in the spotlight. The young, ambitious engineer with the world at his feet. That was a lifetime ago. Now, he was just a man with a mop and a dream of revenge. But revenge, as David knew too well, was a dish best served in silence. And the time for silence had finally passed. He picked up the tools, his hands moving with ease over the engine, tracing the components, each part familiar, each flaw a remnant of what had once been. The work had already begun. David's hands worked methodically, tracing each line, each curve of the V12 prototype that lay before him. The garage was still and quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the sound of his tools clinking softly against metal. As he stood there, inspecting the engine, he felt the weight of history pressing on him. This was his moment, not just to fix an engine, but to expose the years of lies and deceit that had been buried under the polished veneer of Reynolds Autotech. Chase's voice still echoed in David's mind. Fix it, or work overtime for 6 months. It was meant to humiliate, to break him. But as David's fingers worked, touching the delicate components, he found a strange kind of solace in the task. He wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a failure. He was a man who knew exactly what he was doing and who had learned from the mistakes of those who thought they could bury him. It didn't take long for David to find the first issue. The engine's micro-valve system, which should have been performing with seamless precision, was misaligned. A small but crucial mistake that could throw off the entire system. It was something most engineers wouldn't have noticed, but David, who had designed these systems years ago, saw it immediately. David smiled quietly to himself. It's all coming back to me. Carmen Diaz, the lone female engineer in the shop, had been watching him from the shadows. She had been intrigued ever since David had walked in, sweeping away the derision of the other mechanics with the confidence of someone who knew more than he let on. She had always been the only one to challenge Chase's arrogance, and something about David's quiet demeanor had caught her attention. As David adjusted the valve timing, Carmen couldn't help but approach, her curiosity getting the better of her. "You're not just cleaning up," she said, her voice low but sharp. David glanced up at her, raising an eyebrow. "I never was," he replied quietly, his hands never stopping their work. Carmen studied him for a moment, her eyes flicking between the engine and his focused expression. "I've seen designs like this," she said, taking a small step closer, "but not from Reynolds." David didn't answer at first. He was deep in concentration, aligning the timing system with the precision of someone who had spent years thinking about every little detail. It was almost as if the engine was talking to him, whispering the answers he had once known so well. Finally, he spoke. "This is mine." Well, it was. Once the words hung in the air between them, and Carmen's eyes widened in surprise. "What do you mean? This engine? You designed it?" David's hands slowed as he lifted his gaze, meeting Carmen's eyes with a somber look. 15 years ago, I was the lead engineer for Nexus Engineering. I designed this engine, this whole system. But it wasn't just the engine. It was a revolution. Cleaner, more efficient. We were going to change the industry. His voice dropped, and there was a bitter edge to it. But they stole it from me, framed me, destroyed my career. Carmen stood silent for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always wondered why there was so little innovation coming from Reynolds. The company that had once been known for cutting-edge technology was now just another giant in the automotive world, coasting by on reputation rather than real progress. Now, it made sense. "They stole it," Carmen repeated, more to herself than to David. "You're saying this engine, this prototype, was yours from the start?" David nodded, his fingers tracing the familiar designs he had once laid out on paper. "Every line, every part. I designed it to be better, to last longer. But they wanted the profits, not the designer. And my skin was a problem for them." Carmen's expression shifted, a mix of anger and understanding crossing her features. She had spent years studying engineering and had never once encountered a designer with a story like David's. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized something. "I never believed in the system here," Carmen said, her voice quiet but resolute. "I've been trying to solve problems they don't want to fix. They'll never allow real progress, not if it threatens their control." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "You're right. This engine could change everything. But it can't just stay buried." David looked at her, feeling the weight of the truth settling between them. He had spent years watching his ideas rot, stolen by a company that had no interest in true innovation, only in keeping the wheels of their empire spinning. "I need your help, Carmen," he said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "I need to fix this. Not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt along the way. This engine, it's not just a machine. It's a symbol, a proof of what they've done." Carmen nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. She could see the weight of David's burden now, the weight of a life lost, of years stolen by those who thought they could erase him. But she also saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire that had driven her own career, even when the industry tried to crush her. "We'll do it," Carmen said, her voice steady now. "We'll expose them. We'll show the world what they've been hiding." David gave a single, appreciative nod as he returned his attention to the engine. He could feel the pieces falling into place, the plan unfolding before him. This was no longer just about proving his worth. This was about redemption, justice, and finally putting an end to the corruption that had haunted him for far too long. As the hours ticked by, the garage seemed to grow quieter, the murmurs of disbelief and mocking laughs fading into the background. One by one, the other mechanics drifted away, their attention lost to whatever distractions lay elsewhere. Only Carmen remained, observing David with a quiet intensity. By the time the engine roared to life, David could feel his pulse quicken. It wasn't just the prototype that was coming back to life. It was everything he had worked for, everything he had lost. He glanced up at Carmen, who was now standing just a few feet away, her eyes wide in amazement as the engine hummed with power. "I told you I could fix it," David said quietly, his voice tinged with something that wasn't quite pride, but a quiet satisfaction. Carmen stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the engine. "It's perfect," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. David stood back, watching the hum of the engine, and for the first time in years, he felt the familiar pull of hope. This wasn't just about fixing a machine. It was about fixing everything they had broken. But now, as the prototype's power thrummed through the air, David knew the next challenge had only just begun. Chase Reynolds would be furious. The real battle was about to start. The garage was silent except for the steady hum of the V12 prototype. David stepped back, wiping the sweat from his brow. The engine was purring as if it had been running for years, not just hours of painstaking work. It had taken everything he had, but now it was fixed, running better than it ever had before. Carmen stood beside him, her eyes glued to the machine, her mind clearly racing. "David, this is beyond anything I could have imagined," she said quietly. "They won't let this slide. They won't just let you fix it and walk away." David gave a small, grim smile. "I know, but that's exactly what I'm counting on." He straightened up, his face hardening with resolve. They need to see this. They need to know what they've done, and they need to answer for it. Just as the words left his mouth, the garage doors suddenly slid open, and the unmistakable sound of expensive shoes clicking on the concrete floor filled the air. Chase Reynolds, with his cold blue eyes and sharp suit, strode into the room, flanked by a few of his senior engineers. His eyes immediately locked onto the V12 prototype, and a sneer crossed his face. "Is it running?" Chase asked, his voice smooth but filled with an unmistakable edge. David stepped forward, not bothering to mask the anger that had been simmering beneath his calm exterior. "It's running better than it ever has," he said, his voice steady. "Better than you could ever dream of." Chase's expression flickered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "What's this? Some kind of game? I gave you a simple task. Fix the engine or get out. Instead, you're acting like this is a victory." His gaze shifted to Carmen, who was standing a few feet away. "And you, still playing with the janitor's toys, I see." Carmen's fists clenched at her sides, but David placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "This isn't a game, Chase. This is real," he said, his voice now carrying a note of authority. "This engine? This was my design, my work, stolen from me. But it's not just this prototype. It's everything. Your company, your legacy, built on lies and theft. I've been cleaning your floors for years, but I've been watching." Chase's lips twitched into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You really think this changes anything? You're just a janitor who got lucky. It doesn't matter if you can fix an engine. Your place in this company is beneath me. Always will be." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "And when I'm done with you, you'll never work in this industry again." David's heart pounded, but he stood his ground. "You don't get it, Chase. This isn't about a job. This is about justice. This engine isn't just about fixing one machine. It's about proving who I am and what you've stolen from me." There was a tense silence in the room as Chase stared at David. The mechanics in the back, who had been too intimidated to speak up earlier, now stood in the doorway, watching. Chase noticed them, and his expression shifted, the veneer of confidence cracking slightly. "Get back to work," he barked, before turning back to David. "You think you've won? You've just made a fool of yourself." David shook his head slowly. "No, Chase. You've made the mistake of thinking you can keep getting away with this. But you're wrong. The world will see what you've done. This isn't just about a single prototype anymore. It's about everything." Chase looked as though he was about to retort when Carmen stepped forward. her voice calm but filled with conviction. "The truth doesn't stay buried forever, Chase. It's time you faced it." Chase's eyes flickered with something between anger and fear, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "You're delusional," he said, turning to leave the garage. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." As Chase and his engineers exited the room, the tension in the air was palpable. David and Carmen exchanged a glance, both of them knowing that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Later that evening, as David sat alone in his small apartment, his mind raced. He had never imagined that this moment, this confrontation with Chase, would be so bitter. But as the adrenaline from the encounter faded, the weight of what he had just done sank in. The V12 prototype had been the first step. Now, it was time to take it further. David had never truly felt the burden of the years he'd spent in obscurity. But now, everything had changed. The path ahead was uncertain, but he had a single goal in mind: exposing Reynolds Autotech for what it truly was. He opened the worn notebook that had become his constant companion, flipping through the pages filled with old designs, calculations, and sketches. He could feel the pulse of his old self, the man who had been at the forefront of innovation, urging him to take action. But there was more to be done. He had a plan, a way to show the world what had been taken from him, to bring the truth to light in a way that could not be ignored. As the evening passed, David was no longer the janitor who had been hidden in the shadows of Reynolds Autotech. He was something more: an engineer, a creator, and a man ready to take back everything that had been stolen from him. The battle was far from over. And David knew that this was only the first chapter in a story that would change the world. The days following David's confrontation with Chase were filled with a quiet intensity. While the company went on with its usual business, David and Carmen worked in secret, gathering everything they could. It was a race against time, and they knew they couldn't waste a single moment. David spent late nights at his makeshift lab, dissecting every aspect of the prototype, running tests, documenting every failure and breakthrough. Carmen, ever the brilliant mind, meticulously combed through files, pulling data from hidden corners of Reynolds Autotech's archives. They needed proof, irrefutable proof, that Chase and his family had been orchestrating a conspiracy that reached far beyond just their stolen prototype. But as the tension in the garage built, the cracks in the foundation of Reynolds Autotech were beginning to show. The media started to catch wind of the stories surrounding the company's illegal components, the corporate sabotage, the deliberate failure built into their vehicles. There were whispers, rumors spreading like wildfire, and every day, the pressure on Chase grew heavier. It wasn't long before the first wave of leaks hit the public. A series of articles appeared on several well-known automotive websites, each one revealing more about the secretive inner workings of Reynolds Autotech. The revelations were devastating. Proprietary designs had been stolen from David, illegal parts had been embedded in the cars for years, and a global conspiracy of manipulation had been silently running in the background. Then came the bombshell. A former employee, anonymously speaking through an encrypted interview, shared an explosive detail. Chase Reynolds wasn't just taking from his competitors. He was stealing from his own father. And he wasn't just ruining lives. He was plotting to corner the market on failure. The media storm was relentless. The world was waking up to the truth. And it wasn't just about the prototype anymore. It was about every worker, every engineer, every customer who had been lied to. Reynolds Autotech was on the brink. David knew it was time. With Carmen's help, they orchestrated a public demonstration that would expose everything once and for all. They invited industry leaders, journalists, and activists to a private event where they would witness the results of the work David had done. But this wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing the world what true innovation could look like when it wasn't corrupted by greed. On the day of the demonstration, David stood in front of a carefully assembled audience. The two engines, the prototype he'd fixed, and the corrupted Reynolds model, sitting side by side. "Today, you'll see the truth," David began, his voice calm but powerful. "For years, I've been fighting to reclaim what was taken from me. This isn't just about one engine. This is about the future of innovation. This is about showing the world that integrity and progress can, and should, go hand in hand." He motioned to the two vehicles. "On the left, you have a machine that represents the future of engineering. Clean, efficient, built to last. And on the right, well, you have a reminder of the dangers when greed trumps responsibility. This is the engine that has been put into thousands of vehicles, designed not to last, not to thrive, but to fail, repeatedly, so the company could profit off of its customers' misfortune." The crowd was silent as the engines were started. David's engine hummed smoothly, its performance flawless. But when the Reynolds engine roared to life, there was something off. Its power wavered, sputtering at first, before giving way to loud, irregular sounds that filled the room. The data on the screen behind David confirmed what everyone could see. The Reynolds engine was faltering, deliberately designed to fail. The audience murmured in shock. David's voice rang out, cutting through the silence. "This," he said, pointing to the Reynolds engine, "is what happens when profit becomes more important than people." The journalists quickly moved to take their notes, capturing every moment, every number, every failing component. The presentation was streamed live, and within minutes, the hashtag number Reynolds Reckoning was trending worldwide. But David wasn't done. He called Carmen to the front, and together they displayed the leaked documents, the ones that showed how Chase Reynolds and his father had orchestrated the theft of his designs, how they'd used their power to silence whistleblowers and frame him for crimes he didn't commit. The documents were irrefutable, and the public's reaction was swift and brutal. By the time the demonstration ended, the damage to Reynolds Autotech was irreversible. Within hours, stock prices plummeted. Shareholders pulled out, and former employees began to come forward with their own stories of retaliation and corporate espionage. The company was crumbling under the weight of its lies. As the news spread, Chase Reynolds' public image was shattered. No amount of money could protect him now. He was arrested on charges of fraud, corporate theft, and a series of other criminal offenses. It was clear that the law would soon take its toll. But for David, it wasn't about the revenge. It was about justice. A few days later, David stood outside the headquarters of Reynolds Autotech one last time. The building, which had once been a symbol of success and innovation, now stood as a ghost of corporate greed. He had done it. He had reclaimed his future and, in the process, brought down an empire built on lies. The media had moved on to other stories, but for David, this victory wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about proving that even the most invisible person in the room could change the world. The rest of the team, the mechanics who had stood by him, Carmen, and even the unexpected ally in Mr. Lindell, had all played a role in the dismantling of the old system. But now it was time for something new. David walked with Carmen and the rest of his newfound allies toward the new facility they were building, the Marlene Hughes Engineering Innovation Center. This time, there would be no secrets, no stolen ideas. This time, the world would see a new kind of engineering, one built on truth, integrity, and progress. As the sun began to set on the horizon, casting a golden light over the future they were about to build, David couldn't help but smile. The janitor had taken out the trash, And now, the engineer was finally ready to build the future.